All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our premier live virtual and hybrid events video conversations, where we're going to be focusing on after the event. And as always, with you is myself, Ken Khan, Director of Partnerships and Collaboration, and my colleague.
I'm Roxanne Glosser. I'm Director of Marketing and Learning with i2i Technologies. And for our conversation today, we have, through the series, we've walked all the way from planning, all the way through what to do during the event. And now we are at after the event. What is something that is either overlooked or that you have seen people have kind of fumbled? They've like weakly attempted it, but it didn't really turn out well. So, specifically, that after the event, what is something that's either overlooked or that you've seen someone that's done and they've not done it really well? So, you want to kick us off?
Yes. And once again, I'm like, there's lots of things to choose from here. So I bet some of these things will kind of percolate as we comment on each other's answers. And, we had a little pre-talk before this, and Roxanne was like, I'm having a hard time thinking something specifically virtual or hybrid related. And I was like, I wasn't even thinking that way. Because to me, the biggest thing that's often fumbled, because put yourself in this situation, especially if you've ever planned any kind of event. It's like all that energy goes into the planning part of it, putting it together. You do it, you're so exhausted, and you're on one hand you're like, oh, that was so much fun, I'm going to miss it. On the other, you're like, I'm so glad that I'm done now. And so there's this uh sense to relax, right? And it's like, you're right there at the goal line. Don't relax, finish out strong. And so to me, I think what I'm going to go with here is, I think I'm going to go with follow up here, even though this could be something for any type of event. I'm going to go with follow up. I think lots, and this is from my experience in attending other people's events, is I think sometimes there's no follow up. You had this great experience at the conference. You met all these people. You were like, wow, they really did this well. They put this together. And then you hear nothing more when it's just like, did I imagine that? Like, was that really as great as I thought it was? Because it's like I've never heard from these people again until they're ready to pump up their next event and want me to come back to it. And I think the follow up is something that's commonly overlooked. And Roxanne and I've learned just in doing our own, internal events that we do for i2i Technologies and helping other customers. It's like you really need to think about that as you're going into the event. It's another one of those aspects that needs to be planned out, because if you don't plan out, you're so exhausted when it's done, or it's even more work when it's done, because you got to be like, what happened now? Like, what do we want to tell people about? Like, what is it that we want to follow up with them? So it's, that follow up message, like, and, lots of the things that when we work with people, will be in that follow up message. It'll be like, a thank you for attending, a thank you to our presenters, highlighting our presenters, our keynoters, our sponsors that
Mhm.
were part of the event. We normally have some type of like a conference survey. And so we'll usually remind people, hey, if you didn't get a chance to do the survey, go ahead and complete that survey. Um, One of the big events that we've done annually, they do continuing education hours, right? And so they'll leave a window open for people to get their information in for that. So that's another thing we like to put in the follow up of like, hey, if you haven't submitted for your hours, you got till this day for this to happen. If there's things that they're expecting, like with those hours, they'll often be like, well, when am I going to get my certificate, right? When am I, so it's a good way to be like, oh, and the hours are going to close here, and then here's when we plan to get you your certificate. So it's just a great way to, you know, capstone that event, especially if you want something high quality, and you want to close out on a high note. And another aspect that we have in a lot of those messages too is what we've started doing with one particular event has been announcing their next dates as the conference is closing. So, people had a great experience. You already want to be like, hey, if you love this, here's when the next dates are. And so that's another thing that we've commonly kept in a follow-up message too, is like, okay, close out by reminding them, if you like, you already did your survey, you got your hours, you're just waiting for your certificate. Maybe you want to know where the recordings, are their recordings available, where are they going to be located at, and then, okay, when's the next conference? I'm going to already go ahead and put it on my calendar to be on the lookout for, call for proposals, or when registration is going to open, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think, to me, the big thing that's commonly overlooked and fumbled is the follow-up. It's either not done at all, or it's an afterthought, and then it's kind of cobbled together and not coherent, and it often doesn't match up with the experience that people had with an event.
Yeah, that, as you were talking, I was thinking about the follow-up as it relates into that communication plan we talked about. And as you were saying, as we work on events with people, or even our internal events, it's included on there. So we're like, we know once we have the event, the follow-up, we know when it's going to be. We have a little placeholder in this little process, but a placeholder where you're just jotting things down. Oh, remember, we need to tell them this. We need to include this. Which can be nice as you're going through the process of planning and supporting the event, where you're like, you can see that thread of integration throughout. And I loved what you were saying of, reminding people where things are, things that are coming up. And what I jotted down while you were talking, I was like, it really, for me, it's a way to be in service to others. And that's one of the things that we have as a core value, and our partners that we've worked with, they really are, as they look at doing these events, why are you doing them? And so, especially some of our educational events we've worked on, it really is to enable the accessibility to the content, but we're really serving those who are coming to the event. And so I think that's part of that closeout. So that is something that I jotted down with that piece. And then you started dipping into what was going to be my answer, but I'll expand on that. So my answer, I'm going to just kind of expand on that conference survey, and then that save the date. Because when you were talking about, we send out the surveys, yes. And I would say where I think people fumble is they'll send out the survey, they'll collect the information, and then we could probably say it in unison, they won't do anything with it. They never look at it again. And that is, in my mind, that is something that's disrespectful to the people who took time to give you feedback, to let you know how you're doing. So you look at, as you're doing that after action report, if you're looking at doing a plus delta, you're like, oh, these things are working great, we're going to keep them. Here's our delta. These are the things we need to change. How can we improve these? And so I think that would be in the fumble category. A lot of people don't do that. Now I've got one for the thing that I noticed that some people don't do. And this is specific to, I notice this with conferences. They'll have all the promotion going on for the event. All their social media looks good. Their newsletters look good. Everything's for the event. And then once the event passes, they won't update those graphics for the next event. So if it's back to a generic placeholder, which we do on some of the accounts that we help manage, or if it's using those banners, images to promote the next, save the date, whatever it is, because that, to me, if I'm looking at events, I want to know, is it a professional event? Is it going to be well run? And I think the first time you encounter events on social media, you see organizations, and if you see information that's 6 months out of date, 8 months out of date, you're like, okay, what's going on here? Is this going to be a quality event? So that's one that I would say it would probably straddle the categories. Either it's not done or slightly fumbled, but I would say on the analysis of the data, that would be a fumble that I've seen.
Yeah, I think, there's lots of power in that data too. And I think sometimes I've been in groups where they've talked about it, and then moved on to the next thing. And then so much time passes before they start working on the next event, they kind of forget about all that stuff that they talked about. And, what we help people do is like, let's talk about it. Let's note some things together. What are some things we're seeing? And, even when it's like one time, like one person says, I didn't like the app, right? But then you got 20 people saying they liked it. It's still like, okay, I don't want to put a lot of credibility in that one person, but I do want to note like, okay, well, maybe there's something we need to look at. Did they make any other comments related to what they didn't like about the app? Is there something that we can look at, even though the majority of people liked it? And what we started doing is, as we're analyzing the survey, maybe even looking at attendance reports, like we can look at, especially in a virtual conference, it's one of the advantages, right? You can see how many people actually went there, how many people were in there, how many people were in there for 10 minutes and then left, right? So it's like, oh, was the topic and the abstract strong, but then they got in there and they were like, oh, this isn't what we thought it was going to be, or the presenters were weak. So you can kind of use that information too to be like, ooh, look, some of these topics are really popular. Maybe we need to make sure we have more topics like that, or maybe we need to have a track specifically focused on that, and kind of note that stuff down. One of the events that we've done annually now, it's like we'll kind of take that stuff, and there's usually like 8, 10, 15 things that, like, as we're going through the next planning process, we're continuing to go back to look at that, like, okay, are we, these are the things that we thought were important to factor into the next year's event. Are we honoring that? Are we adapting that form that we had? Are we changing up the way that we're communicating? So it's analyzing that data, and then, like you said, using it too, not just having one quick, I guess I should say quick, one after action meeting, but then not noting it anywhere to use it.
The other part of using that data is to get it into the planning process where it needs to be. So for instance, the group that we do work with annually, well, we are not technically the conference planning committee, but there's some information in there, and you package it so nicely to pass it off to them so that when they are making the decisions on the theme and the tracks and what the next year's conference is going to be like, it is, they've taken into account and they've heard from the participants who attended this year. And I think that is a piece that's really helped them, continue to grow their attendance each year. And I think that's when people attend, and then they know that if they give their input, it's not just going to be like, screaming into the wind, but it's going to be used. And I think people can tell that.
Yeah, and another one of the things we've done with some of the survey comments too is we used it for promotion, right? Some of the people that had very glowing comments, unique comments, like lots of times will be like, this is the first time I've attended this event, and here's what my experience was like. It's like, it's a good way to help promote and use in marketing going forward too. So yeah, lots of uses for that. And I think you're right on. I think that was my, if you were going to answer first and you took what my lead was about the follow-up, I was probably going to go to surveys, and really the power of all that data. Because yeah, I think you're right. Sometimes it's not even looked at. Because again, anybody that's planning an event, by the end you're so exhausted, you just want to break. And to me, it's really important to close out, like the last big event that we did. I mean, we were probably almost 4 weeks of like pretty hardcore work once the event was done to wrap everything up perfectly. So when we were ready to pick up again, it's easy to, we know where to look because it's easy to find. We're not like trying to remember the conversation.
Okay, now I have a great answer that is specifically for a virtual event. And it's what we did this year, because there were, that team leads we were supporting it for that week. And when the last session ended, we immediately had a little face-to-face huddle. And I think we talked about that in another video, because if we had been on site together, you've got the little space at the convention center where you can go hang out, or behind the registration desk. And we had our group chat where we were working, but that is where we immediately connected. Just quick, I say quick debrief. I think we ended up being there like an
It
hour.
felt quick, and then I was like, "Did you realize that we were on there for like 2 hours?"
Right. But that, as you come to it with that mindset of like at the end of the conference, now that to me was like the end of that. But as you said, it was probably 4 more weeks of work getting everything that we needed to get updated on social media, getting the communication out, getting that data analyzed. And so I think that's just kind of part of our plan and part of that package. When we put it together, we're like, we can help guide you with this. And, there are parts that some people can do themselves. Others they prefer they're like, could you just do that? Because I need to go on vacation. I'll see you in 2 weeks. So, but that definitely, yeah, when you said that, I'm like, I think that would be 100% something I would recommend for virtual events, is to collect your team, just to take that collective breath and be like, oh my goodness, we did it. It's kind of that celebration, and kind of like the, oh my gosh, this happened, that happened. But to come together as a team, very important, because that's something you would do in a face-to-face. So how do you do that in a virtual event?
One other thing I'm going to mention, this is where I thought you were going to go, is if there are recordings, you got those recordings, but they're raw recordings. And most of us don't have in-house production places where you can take a bunch of time with it, but you do want to take those raw recordings. And one of the things that we typically work with groups is like, cutting off any extra, like if there's extra stuff at the beginning or extra stuff at the end, or sometimes like people say, hey, there was this part in the middle that somebody said something sensitive, can you guys cut that out? And so basically we'll polish up those raw recordings, and then usually put some type of good graphics, to bumper it too, like, just a good intro graphic, maybe has some information about the organization, maybe talks about, hey, here's the next date, something that gives some consistency to those. And then those are great to be used to highlight different things in the event, again, for promotion, marketing, as an added benefit to people that paid for the conference, access to different recordings of the events, or maybe even something like, oh, you weren't able to come to the conference, for this fee, you can get access to all of the sessions that we had during the conference. So I think that's another after the event thing that I think sometimes doesn't get capitalized on, because it does require some work. I mean, I'm not going to like, again, if you're just throwing up the raw recordings where you're like, yeah, they are what they are, that's easy. But like to add some polish to them and give them more of a professional look, it takes a little bit of work.
And that little extra effort, that because we generally, our preference is to have the recording start as soon as someone hits the room, but we do have that prep time. So anytime I've popped in, I'm like, yes, there's going to be some light editing to it, and we can take off that beginning, and if there's something at the end they need removed. That level of support, again, it's one of those things that just provides a little calmness and builds the trust with the presenters, that they know that we're going to help them along the way. And that includes, making them look good in that recording too.
So I think that wraps us up on this series. So hopefully you've enjoyed our conversations as we've gone through our 6 different service and support options for Premier. And yeah, stay tuned. We'll be putting out some more content here going forward. We have an idea we're working on right now for a special event to maybe capstone this series like we did on the last one. So thanks for tuning in. And yeah, if we can help you with anything, or you're just interested in getting together and having a chat, we'd love to connect sometime.